Hi, I'm Lauren Raybould, and I'm an editor for Data Centre Insight.
Michael McCarthy, I'm Director of Cloud Infrastructure Ireland, and I represent AWS, Google, Microsoft and Meta.
Fantastic. Thank you for your time today. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation about the state of the Irish data centre market. So, as we're in 2025, how would you describe the current state of the Irish data centre market? Are we in a phase of renewed growth, consolidation, transition?
So, in terms of where we're at in 2025, I think the significant issue for us is the long-awaited new connection policy by the energy regulator for large energy users, which are now de facto. It's a connection policy for data centers. Now, this has been going on for a number of years. We've made a number of submissions, and we have been expecting this publication for some time, but I think it's imminent. Now, that will chart a pathway for future connections for data centers and large energy users for the next, for the foreseeable future in Ireland. So we've seen quite a lot of investment in data centers and associated digital infrastructure in Ireland over the last 10 plus years. But there's been a de facto moratorium in the Dublin region in recent years. And we need to kind of look long term at what's needed in order to sustain that level of investment. And we have a very hard earned reputation as a kind of a global digital hub. And all of these companies that are operating in Ireland, they're there because the Irish government, successive Irish governments have gone abroad to trade shows. They've gone across the globe to beat the foreign direct investment drum for Ireland. So we now need to see, in my view, a permanent policy around large energy users that complements the existing level of facilities and investment in Ireland. So it's quite crucial, actually, in terms of the elephant in the room will always be the energy usage, but there's an issue in terms of some of the debate focuses on the amount of energy being used, but we need to see the debate in its entire context. So look at generation. So from our perspective, sustainability and decarbonisation are big parts of the MO of CI companies in Ireland. So we want to continue the efforts, the twin transition. This is government policy around digitalisation and decarbonisation. And you can't do decarbonisation without data centres. So we would like to see a policy that speaks to that kind of sustainable kind of growth of the industry in line with the decarbonisation objectives of government. So we commissioned the economic consultants Baringa to look at, for example, post-2030, what the Irish data centre industry and what cloud service companies in particular can do in terms of realising Ireland's ambition for offshore wind. We have a huge ambition, huge rich natural resource of wind, and we want, and the report looked at this, what's the role that data centres can play? What role can data centres play, for example, in helping us to achieve those targets? And it's quite simple. Post-2030 in Ireland, we're going to need a domestic off-taker of all of that offshore wind. So in order to realise that ambition around offshore wind, which is crucial in terms of decarbonisation, the data centres have a huge role to play.
Absolutely, absolutely. So on the policy side, do you think we're seeing clear signals from the government and local authorities that they're on board to kind of really put that into place in the next coming years?
Yeah, well, so a number of years ago, the government published a statement, in other words, a policy paper on data centres, and that was reviewed and republished about 2 or 3 years ago. And it's entitled The Role of Data Centres in Ireland's Enterprise Economy. So the Irish government have a supportive data centre policy statement at the heart of government policy. And that's very important because the industry permeates across enterprise employment, the departments of climate. So it's a very strong policy document. And what we would like to see is a regulatory policy, in other words, an LEU, that operationalises that government statement. So there is a lot done, but there's a hell of a lot more to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with the power availability and grid constraints, and there have been ongoing challenges. So that situation, we've touched on it a little bit just then, but how is that situation evolving and what progress has been made around new grid connections or capacity planning?
Well, the EirGrid, the TSO, the people who run and operate our grid in Ireland, they published under the leadership of their former Chief Executive Officer, Mark Foley, a number of years ago, a publication called Shaping our electricity future. And that's the blueprint for the development of the grid in Ireland that will help us realise the now 80% target of renewable electricity on the system by 2030. It used to be 70, now it's 80%. So that sets out the blueprint for grid development. Now, that's going to require, leadership at local and national level. It's going to require shovels and grounds, hard hats, overhead cables, underground cables, bulldozers. But that's a necessary process that we need to go through to transition the grid for all of that renewable energy. And it's part of EirGrid is a commercial semi-state body, but it's effectively linkage to government. So there's a very strong policy around developing that grid, and we support EirGrid in their efforts to develop and make available the grid for that transition to 80% of renewables by 2030.
Yeah, that's quite an ambitious sustainability goal. So how do you think data center operators are aligning with those targets? Do you think it's feasible to achieve 80%? Because obviously they've increased the percentage. And what role does the renewable energy or new technology play in that journey? I know we have the destination, but
yeah, so I think there is again, it's a very important role for cloud service companies and CII companies in particular, because we're the biggest customers of corporate PPAs. So another mechanism by which we procure renewable electricity and bring it to the system without a cost to the exchequer. So the national targets around decarbonisation, the targets around offshore wind, for example, and also the blueprint that EirGrid has set out to reach those 80% speaks very much hand in glove to the sustainability ethos, but also the ambition that we have as companies that's always being realised around procuring more CPPAs. So in other words, the corporate power purchase agreements that allow us to directly engage with developers of renewable energy and bring that to the system without a cost to the exchequer.
Fantastic. So moving on to Data Centre Ireland 2025. So obviously it's coming up very, very soon. What are you most looking forward to at this year's event, and what key themes or discussions do you expect will dominate in the market?
Well, I think it's a very exciting time and a very important time in terms of the data centre industry in Ireland. And I think the data centre exhibition has grown in stature each year. And it's a collective of people who are involved in not just renewable energy, but involved in the kind of technical operations, involved in, various companies that are all part of a very critical supply chain. And this is where the employment, ecosystem follows the data center investment. At the data center exhibition, I mean, the great and the good will be there, and it'll be a collective of, I think, very strong minds, very kind of ambitious plans, but people who have achieved a lot in terms of, developing companies and businesses that form a critical part of the supply chain that sees a vibrant data center industry in Ireland. So I'm looking forward to that. I think the main topics will be, just as we've discussed, I think grid stability would be a very important focus. I know that the Minister of State in the Department of Energy and Climate, Timmy Dooley, is doing the keynote speech. So I think that reflects, for example, the status of the event, and also highlights, I think, that this is the kind of, this is a significant event for everybody involved in this space, that be policy or technical operations or commercial activities or enterprise or renewable. And so I'm looking forward to that. And I also think that the LEU connection policy will feature in terms of the various kind of workshops and the various discussions that will be there, and will reflect, I think, a very strong kind of national, local audience, but also international experts in this area.
Fab. And do you think the topics of AI and efficient, sustainable cooling methods would come into play as well as a result of
Absolutely. So I think the sustainability around energy usage and water usage will feature prominently in those discussions. And I also think the next wave of investment, for example, in digital terms, that'll be AI. So the next wave of investment will be obviously AI. So I think it'll be a hugely interesting gathering for those who are bringing particular viewpoints or expertise on that next wave of digital investment and revolution, which is AI. So I think that'll be particularly exciting, because it'll be a huge learning curve for many people who will be attending, and I've no doubt will stimulate very good, strong debate over the 2 days in the RDS.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how do you think the industry mood going into this year's conference is going to reflect that broader market confidence and innovation in Ireland's data centre sector?
I think there's a very strong confidence there. I mean, if you look at the policy levers that we've described, for example, around developing a very strong, stable grid, or continuing to develop a very strong, sustainable grid that can transition to 80% of renewables by 2030, is a very strong focus of the minds that will be gathered in the RDS for the DC exhibition. And I think also there'll be a strong interest, for example, in what the minister in particular has to say, because that will reflect, government thinking on the matter. And that'll be very important to bring all of those various strands together to get a kind of a view over the next number of years in terms of the cloud services and data center industry in Ireland.
Fantastic. So moving on to a bit of technology and infrastructure evolution now. So we're seeing a greater adoption of modular and energy efficient UPS and power systems. How significant do you think that shift is, and what benefits does this offer to operators here in Ireland?
I think it's quite significant, because if you look at the industry in some respects is very nascent, but it's at the cutting edge of technology. And all of the time we're seeing different kind of plans or different kind of methodologies around improving the sustainability of the central parts, the focal parts of data center build-outs. And that's very important from, I think, a domestic Irish economic point of view, because we now have companies who have been building out Irish data centers, bringing that expertise to other jurisdictions. So that supply chain is quite crucial in terms of evolving sustainable technology, but it's also very significant in gross value add for the Irish economy, because we now have an indigenous economy built around the development of data centers and an expertise that's across the continent, which is really exciting. So I think there'll be a strong interest in looking at kind of the most recent innovative technological developments.
Absolutely. And my final question, you've already touched on this a little bit, but obviously looking beyond 2025, I know we've put that policy in place, but what do you see as the most important steps needed or innovations needed to ensure this continued sustainable growth in the industry?
I think it's very important that the policy levers are right. We need a policy environment that's conducive to allowing industry to keep doing what they're doing, and it's crucial in terms of the next wave of investment that Ireland can capture that investment with a very strong government policy, complemented by a very strong regulatory policy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, Michael.